Daydream Society. 3. The dog-eared page from the Daydream Society feels warm, real. I close it. Marcel is flinging paint with a fevered tenacity. In his gritted teeth I can see prisons containing rabid breaths. The best approximation of the layout of his canvas would be a landscape, more appropriately a treescape. The trees are twisted and human-like, reaching their grasping branches into the sky, yearning, entwining with the paling moon. One anthropomorphic tree nods off in a corner by a dried-out ravine, roots splayed out, thin branch delicately clutching another which is cracked down the center and lies drying out down there. Leaves, fern-like, form an imperceptible halo around its highest branches. Marcel blots out the moon with a brick red and redefines it. The voice he spits between slashes of red spoke to me again last night. I take a seat on the floor next to a dried puddle of spilled indigo. Did it say anything new? Marcel gives a deadpan look to match my cavalier tone. His face struggles briefly for composure, then, more of the same, essentially. I insist that he let me in on the secrets his nighttime hallucinations are shouting to him. I mean, you can't bring it up, not if you're not willing to spill the details. Silas, he asks after a contemplative silence, what do you remember about yesterday? I was taking opiates with Cindy Blue, I tell him, at her place. You remember the paint color inside of her apartment? Marcel queries while finding a way to mutilate another tree. I believe it was off-white. The color on the outside? Yellow, I think. Or white. Marcel turns around with raised eyebrows. You're not sure. Well, so the fuck what? What did you two talk about yesterday? Can you remember that? It was casual conversation mostly, stuff between friends. She wanted to talk about Felix. Can you remember? Marcel interrupts. The gravity of every moment? Those secret whispers behind every detail? Where are you going with this, Marcel, exactly? I wait for his answer, cautious, patient. Can you be sure that you were actually there at all? That the memory you described even happened? Or happened yesterday? You believe you were somewhere yesterday, somewhere else in all the yesterdays. But what if you were never in those places? Never had those memories, really? If your neurological process created those memories somehow? I tell Marcel that I'm having trouble understanding what this philosophic mind game of his has to do with the voice that screams at him in the night. He replies in a low tone, the voice isn't speaking to me in words. Not exactly. I could be upstairs, with my newspaper clippings. It speaks in images like memories coming back to me. I don't hear the voice speaking directly, I just know what it's trying to tell me. It communicates to me in flashes of memories I never had, and I just know. Marcel's apartment is littered with unfinished canvas. It hangs from or leans against every wall. I take a moment to reflect on a red and gray themed canvas, depicting a throng of faceless humanoids emerging from an underground shelter via ladder, following each other in pairs in a lonely journey through desert oblivion. I pick up his guitar, I beat up Martin, and strum a few chords, pick out a sparse lead pattern. Outside, the wheels of cars turn past us, their echoes waning into emptiness, carrying passengers downtown through a night of clouded purpose. Marcel lets his paintbrush drop on the table softly, his curling hair concealing half his face. Let's go out for a ride, he insists. What do you say? The shadows of oak trees slant across Marcel's windshield, ambivalent strangers disappearing back into starless night. We turn onto Claiborne. A pair of bums dance underneath the yellow fluorescence of a closed chicken store, as if moving in reverse on rewinding tape. So, does Felix know? Marcel asks me from the driver's seat. About what? I managed to return innocently. I roll down my window and take out a cigarette. Marcel gives me his deadpan look again. You know about what? I'm just curious to know if he's found out about you and Cindy yet. Oh, I mumble, taking a puff. It's not like that between us. Shit. We're friends. In the questioning silence that follows, I add, what? Can a person have friends nowadays? She is an interesting girl, I'll admit to you that. Marcel reaches over to me and gestures for a light. Philosophic to some extent. I've heard her use the most intense metaphors to speak about God. Shunyata, I mean. Right, Shunyata. The space in between. That great big empty. I've talked to you about this before. I remember these conversations. Marcel attempting to explain something unexplainable. When I was a kid, he glances at me with one hand on the wheel. My family took me on a trip to the Grand Canyon, deep into the guts of America. Serene, spacey plateaus, shit carved out of rock. So, near the edge of the canyon there's a signpost, and I creep up to it, grabbing the post with one hand so I can get a better look over the precipice. I'm staring over into this abyss, and one of my feet starts to slip. At this moment, I can only think one thing. This is it. I'm falling. This is my last moment. That's when I feel my mother's hand on the back of my shirt, pulling me out, away from the canyon. I was paralyzed for months, by nightmares of falling into that void. The void, he turned smoothly onto a side street, could have shattered my whole perception of myself. After an appropriate pause for reflection. So you're trying to tell me that Shunyata is some kind of oblivion, devoid of our psychic apparatus? I toss my burnt cigarette from the car's window. Marcel considers. Not necessarily devoid of collective ego. Don't go spewing your one consciousness shit at me, I say dryly. I meant it, Marcel laughs, in a Jungian sense. The void's almost impossible to explain to someone else. It's something you develop a kind of intuitive understanding with. You've either experienced the space in between, or you haven't. Cindy understands it, I think. You might also. He eyes me momentarily. Although you may or may not realize it. I might, I respond apathetically. I might not. The Smoking Mind record shop is closed, but we can see the yellow light from one table lamp still shining over the window tapestries from a back room. Marcel's knock is answered by a tall boy with long, tangled hair and translucent eyes, light radiating through cloudy moss, the way a cat's eyes are green. Felix greets us with an enthusiastic, "Well, boys," and takes us up the winding stairway into the back room. My hand limply brushes the yellowed and outdated flyer for a show at the Dragon's Den. There, perched behind a glass display case littered with assorted blown pipes that twist and express themselves in Dr. Seuss-esque poses, he opens those lucid eyes wide and asks, what is it we fine gentlemen are getting into this evening? Marcel was trying to explain Shunyata to me again. I neglect to say anything about a voice allegedly screaming into his mind in the night. That's Marcel's story to tell, or to let fall away into oblivion as if he had never spoken it aloud. Ah yes, Shunyata. Some might say you are too impassive to understand it, Silas, being of such a purely cynical bent. Here he cracks a smile. But I am of the opinion that this is something every philosopher should know. Right, Marcel agrees. Shunyata is the reason behind everything that will ever happen to us. Does it help me get drugs? Or fall in love? I ask with pseudo-naivety. Felix sighs, a patient exhalation. Shunyata, he muses, is the drugs. Shunyata is the pussy. I mumble something, then after a moment, more clearly. Sounds like one of those Zen cone mind tricks. It is. Marcel's voice is careless. The bent, colorful reflections of the pipes from the glass walls of their case are caught dancing in his gray eyes. Felix springs to his feet suddenly. Shunyata itself is the Zen cone which holds within it the joie de vivre, the Holy Spirit, and all secrets of existence, he exclaims, although not specifically Zen, more Taoist perhaps, Gnostic almost. Right. I lean an arm back against a rack of woven hemp shirts, flanked on one side by stacks of old records and torn boxes. And these secrets, Marcel says, are tied in intrinsically somehow with the Jungian shadow consciousness, the building blocks of existence containing within them complete emptiness. Ironic. From up here you can make out the sounds of city life passing by as entangled self-absorption. Felix turns the volume up on a stereo. We can hear tribal drums, set with a falsetto croon. He finishes stashing a couple of pipes underneath the display case, and stops my thought process with a wave of the hand. Hold on a minute to that thought, Silas. Underneath all his tangled hair, Felix is bouncing, jubilant. We've got riddles to answer, absolutely important decisions that must be made, tonight. We've got the white rabbits of our choosing. And here he throws a locked briefcase onto the display table in front of him, as if from nowhere, and opens it. To chase into their respective rabbit holes and dreamlands, there's no time. Looking at him, Marcel bristles. And as the rabbit said, we're late. Finishing his declaration, Felix giggles wildly. The contents of the briefcase are a veritable psychedelic cornucopia. A psychedelicopia. Ketamine and anorexic glass vials, crushed white. Mushrooms laid out methodically in carefully rolled up sandwich bags. Paper acid, cloaked in the protective shield of foil. Various other powders and experimental psychiatric medications, separated in their own tiny corked vials, each preaching a dogma all its own, sending its insane whispers out into the night. What'll it be, boys? Felix grins widely. I consider his references to Alice in Wonderland. He is a Mad Hatter, high, mercury poisoned, and offering us one of his many hats. Marcel peers inside the briefcase carefully. Is that ketamine? He asks, with the voice of a condemned man offered a chance at freedom. Curiouser and curiouser, I think to myself with a smirk. These words seem to echo inside my consciousness for what may as well be an infinity.